Yes. Well, good morning. I've had an amazing weekend. Who was here for Resound? A lot of us, yeah? Such an amazing time. But just so you know, I clean up well. I decided to wear a little church jacket today, and even I'm not even wearing all black. If you saw me for most of the weekend, that's kind of my MO. But I decided to, put on a little church jacket this morning. Yeah. But I just want to say as well, Luke and Megan, you guys are blessed to have these guys. And we're just grateful for you. I'm grateful for your friendship and just the years we've traversed and then the adventures still to come. And anyway, I just want to honor them as someone who stands in the gap a lot of times between church communities and art communities. To have a pastor, we were talking about this earlier, I was like, to have a pastor who sees the value of the arts and sees the value of creativity, not just for artists, but the value that it brings to the whole community. You may think, well, I'm not one of those creative types, whatever that means. But I want to suggest that that's bad theology. We've all been created in the image of a creative God. And to have pastors that champion that and see the value and bring that, I just want to honor them and you guys recognize the gift that you have for that. We don't see it a lot. So, all right. Well, this morning, I got up and I just was praying and asking, what should I share for the community today? And I have several things that I want to share with you, but I want to start with the same poem that I read yesterday, so that those of you that weren't here, I want to share this with you also. We cannot survive if we only tend to survival. The human heart was designed to be astonished. We need wonder like we need water. We were made for more than meals and management. We were born to bear witness to the miracle of existence. When we lack moments of magic, we fill ourselves with alloyed substitutes and buzzing fluorescence, trying too hard to be the sun. And I was thinking that at the end of it all, the only lasting art that we make is who we become. In Ephesians 2:10, Paul says, a lot of translations will say, you are the handiwork of God, or you are the masterpiece of God. But that word is poema. And when you dig into the root of what Paul was saying, he was saying, you are the poems of God. We are God's art. And if we live from that mindset, it might change the way that we look at one another. What if we walked around and when we saw one another, we began to think, she's the art of God, he's the art of God. God is a strange God. And he is. But Jesus is the Word of God, and we are the poems of God. It's a beautiful concept. You can meditate on that one for a long time. But I began to think, okay, well, if we are the art of God, what is forming us? What is forming our lives? What is God making of us and with us and through us? What are the things that shape who we become? What are the things that shape the art that we become? And honestly, everything in our lives, from the joy that we go through to the pain and the grief that we experience, to the successes, the failures, the love, the loss, all of it works together and begins to shape us spiritually. But what about intentionality in our own lives? And I began to think, I have this book here. It's called 5 Creativity Killers and How to Avoid Them. And in this book, I go through fear, comparison, perfectionism, distraction, and man-made religion. That was my favorite chapter. But I began to think this morning, well, what about 5 keys to unlock creativity in our lives? And so this message is not just for the artist or the working artist, but it is to awaken the creativity that is planted inside of each one of us. Because if at the end of the day, the most lasting art we make is who we become, then maybe we can partner with God in the formation of our own lives through some intentional habits. I don't know about you, but I can get into survival mode. That's why I wrote that poem. We cannot survive if all we do is tend to survival, because the human heart was made to be astonished. We are made to walk that Jacob's ladder between heaven and earth, to go into those deep encounters with the Spirit of God and then bring them back to the earth, whether it's through artistic creations or, Van Gogh himself said, the most artistic thing that I can do is love people. The way that we show up in the world is the art that we are. And it's so easy because our culture more and more teaches us the value of a fast-paced life. And I'm not so sure that that's always a good thing. I find myself, some weeks I'm so busy that it's just a blur. And I wonder why I'm frazzled and stressed and not in a creative mood. And then I sit down and I try to write or create something, and I'm still feeling that anxious energy, you know what I mean? And so I want to give you a few things that I feel will help us live more creative lives. Would you be interested in some of those keys? So get your notes out. We're going to get practical today. Wow, Stephen Roach getting practical. I'm going to try at least. I'll steal a Ray Hughes. Everybody knows Ray Hughes in this house, right? Well, he's been a spiritual father figure to us for a long time. But he'd say, well, listening to me can be a little bit like being handcuffed to a hurricane. Here's another Hughesism. Well, I feel kind of like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I know what I'm here to do, but I don't know where to start. We could go on for hours. But the first key to unlocking creativity in our lives is very simple, and it's gratitude. It's cultivating thankfulness. And that's something that you don't have to be a musician or a visual artist to do, but to cultivate thankfulness in our lives is something that it's so easy to lose sight of. I love sharing this story. You all know the feeding of the 5,000. And last night, if you were here, I talked a lot about the mischief of God, right? That characteristic of God that we often overlook, the mischief of God. Well, this is an example in Scripture of the mischief of God. Here we are, 5,000 men plus women and children in the middle of the desert, 3 days walk away from anywhere, and they run out of food. And the disciples come to Jesus, and they're concerned. We have nothing to eat. And I just see the mischief on his face when he looks at them and kind of raises an eyebrow and says, will you give them something to eat? Can you imagine what they felt? I mean, like, seriously. Put yourself in that situation. You're in the desert with 7,000 people or however many that you led there, and suddenly you have no resources for them. And Jesus just says, will you give them something to eat? And then he just kind of stands back to see what they're going to say. And his next question to them is, he said, okay, you've told me what we don't have, but now tell me, what do you have? He shifted their mindset from focusing on what they did not have, what they lacked, and he asked them, "What do you have?" And what happens to us so often in life is that we get so used to focusing on what we do not have that we lose sight of what we do have. And when we lose sight of what we do have, we're not living in gratitude. We're not living in thankfulness. And when we miss that, we're not going to live very creative lives. What do you have? Well, we have a fish and a loaf of bread. And I love that Jesus took this and he lifted up the nothing that they had. He lifted up the little bit that they had, and he thanked God for it. He blessed it. He thanked God for what they did have. And it was in that moment of thanksgiving that the divine creativity of God was unleashed. And where they had nothing to give to anyone, suddenly they had an abundance, so much so that they were picking up leftovers and putting them in baskets. And so I want to suggest that we have the choice between living a life of scarcity or a life of abundance. And depending on how we look at the circumstances of our lives, we can rationalize either one. But if we want to live a life of creativity, if we want to see the creativity of God break through in our lives, then I want to challenge you and encourage you and invite you to begin putting into practice, even this week, habits of thankfulness for the little that you have. Now, speaking to the artist or the creative specifically right now, I want to say it's easy to think, well, we don't have a platform, or our platform is not big enough, or we don't have the finances, or we don't have the equipment, or we don't have the talent, or we don't have the communication, the community, or the connections. It's easy to look at what we don't have. Well, if I just had this, then. Well, if I just had this, then. I want to challenge you to this week to begin to thank God for what you have and to move from that place and watch the fish and the loaves multiply. So that's thankfulness. All right, the second one I want to give to you this morning is one of my favorites. And this one is curiosity. Cultivating curiosity is a key to unlocking a creative lifestyle. When we go through the same bump in the road at the same time of day, every day of the week, we talk to the same people every day, we do the same things, we wear the same clothes, at least I do, except for Sunday. It's easy to lose curiosity because we get so familiar. I call it the tyranny of the familiar. Because what happens is that it just settles like a glaze over top of what's actually going on under the surface. Cultivating curiosity means slowing our pace enough to take a second look at what you think you already know. We don't have to go on a trip somewhere and see something new or do something different to awaken curiosity in our lives. We just have to look at things a little slant. We have to look at things a second time. The story of Moses and the burning bush. We're all familiar with this one. But I look at it a little bit differently, I think, than a lot of the ways that I've heard it taught, because Moses lived in the back 40 of the desert. Again, a Ray Hughes statement. He lived on the back 40 of the desert. He lived in the middle of nowhere. It was common in the heat of the desert that bushes caught fire every day. The fact that there was a bush on fire in the desert of the Middle East was not anything spectacular. What the miracle of that moment was that Moses had so attuned his heart to sensitivity that he could see wonder in the middle of the mundane. He noticed that there was something different about this bush. This bush was on fire, but it was not consumed. Moses was able to see wonder in the mundane, and at that point, he said he was curious. He turned aside to see. And something that my dear friend Corey and I have talked a lot about is the curiosity of God. How can an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-present being also experience curiosity? That'll make you do some theological backflips. But there is a curiosity of God, and I believe that human creativity awakens the curiosity of God, and that God draws near when we create. Why do I say that? There are so many instances throughout the stories of the Old Testament writings. Not all of them ended up in a positive place, and the one I'm talking about is the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. But it's interesting that they were creating something. They were building something. They were using the creativity that God had put in them. And the scripture said that God was curious to see what they were making. God was curious and drew near. And so I aspire to live a life that attracts the curiosity of God. And when I sit down to write, or when I am playing piano, or whatever it is that I'm doing, I just have this awareness that I am attractive to God. I'm attracting the curiosity of God. And what happens is when I attract the curiosity of God and God draws near, God can't not get involved. God gets FOMO. I like to give God FOMO, fear of missing out, if anybody's wondering. And so when I'm creating and I awaken the curiosity of God to draw near and see what I'm making, sometimes I hear the little whisper, oh, that's really good. What if you did this? And then it becomes a partnership. But there are things that we can do in our lives that awaken curiosity. We can even just ask ourselves that. What can I see today that I think I know? What can I take a second look at? What bush might be on fire in my life that I haven't even thought about? And once you begin to cultivate that mindset in your life, then suddenly all of the mundane awakens and you realize that every bush is on fire. And then you start taking off your shoes because you realize that every place is holy ground. And you start beginning to see the wonder. You know, I was thinking, this is a side note, but I'm going to go with this one. Have you ever wondered why God told everybody to take their shoes off when they were on holy ground? I mean, I'm still curious about that one. I don't fully know. That's one of the curiosities that I'm thinking about. But it is interesting that these days we're learning more and more about grounding. And there's something about when we take off our shoes and we connect with the land that we're on, it centers us. They tell us that it takes away stress and anxiety. It even has physiological benefits. How do we, God has been telling us to do grounding for centuries. And I mean, the truth of it is one of, my whole life is built around finding God in places He's not supposed to be. You guys got really quiet on that one. But it's true. It's true. I love the curiosity of God because God likes showing up in places that He's not supposed to be. That's why He ate dinner with all the wrong people and hung out with all the wrong people, and all the wrong people were all the right people. And when we talk about we are the art of God, here's what I think part of the prophetic is when I see a person, when I encounter a person, do I encounter where they are in their journey right now, and that is all I can see about them? Or can I look beyond their moment and I can see the eternity glimmering in their eye, and I can see the person that God imagined when he first called them into being? And I think that as followers of Jesus, we have to baptize our eyes to see past the reality of the moment and to call forth the people that God had in mind when he imagined them into being. And that's why often people they're like, well, how do you find common ground with these people? You know, the people I have on the podcast, how do you find common ground with them? And, you know, it's sometimes I'm too Christian for the world, and sometimes I'm too worldly for the Christian, and it's a weird thing, but it's because when I look at people, I want to see the eternal person that God has called them to be and somehow make space for them to step into that person. And if it means I'm misunderstood, I'm willing to be misunderstood to go after those people, because I was one of those people. I had an experience here, and this is funny. We were laughing about this, but I'm gonna share because a lot of you guys don't know this, but all the way back in 1996, I was traveling the country in a VW bus, a green VW bus, with my buddy who played the sitar, and this girl, she was a friend of ours, and she did some shakers and whatever, and I had my percussion, and, you know, smelled like Nag Champa and patchouli, and like, we were traveling, and we ended up in Boulder, and we were busking down on Pearl Street to make enough money to get us to New Mexico. And we're down there playing our music on the streets, and this little punk rock couple, the dude had like long white dreads, and, you know, she's wearing combat boots and all leather, and she played in a punk band, but they were both Hare Krishnas. And they invited us to stay in their home. We didn't have anywhere to stay, so we went and stayed in their home. And I remember sleeping on their couch in the living room, and on her mantelpiece was her altar to their gods. And so there were all these idols and candles and incense and stuff, but then right in the back, she had a bookmark that had Jesus with his hands stretched out that said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And I remember in all of my hippiness, I walked up, when everybody went to bed, I walked up to that mantle and I looked at the idol, and then I looked at the bookmark, and I looked at the idol, and I looked at the bookmark, and something was not firing. And I didn't understand how she had all of that on her mantle, but I grew curious. And in the middle of what was a very interesting situation, the Lord began to speak to me and began to draw me to ask those questions. How can something's not exactly right here. If he's the way, the truth, and the life, why does she have this on the altar where she's worshiping somebody else? And it began to awaken those questions in me. Why am I telling you that? I have no idea. But I met Jesus there. So curiosity is the second one. Rabbit trails are the third one. Just kidding. Actually, rabbit trails are very creative, but that's for another sermon. The third one is rest. The third key to creativity is rest. Sabbath rest. Luke talked about it yesterday. The idea that before God created, he breathed in and created space, and then exhaled the let there be. Again, we live in such a fast-paced culture that teaches us more and more content, more and more, let's get this done quicker, faster, better. Continue to, we're working constantly. We're not resting. For those of us that have children, especially teenage children, I'm learning that that's a full-time endeavor. And I mean, Sarah could tell you like the soccer schedules and all that, that's real. But when you get in the middle of that busyness, if we don't stop and rest, it will zap our creativity because we're focused again on survival, just getting the next thing done. We have to intentionally find moments of rest. I had the privilege of interviewing John Eldredge on Makers and Mystics a few years ago. And he was doing I think it was a 5-minute pause at that time, but he was creating this, it was a countercultural act where it's like, okay, so maybe we can't just devote hours to sitting and meditating and praying or whatever. But he's like, what if you do the 5-minute pause? And he created this app where in the middle of our busyness, we would stop and just take 5 minutes to recenter ourselves in the Lord and to cultivate rhythms of rest, however we need to do that in our lives. At the end of the Genesis creation story, when God rested, it wasn't because he was tired. It was because he wanted our lives to begin in rest. He created us on the 6th day, and on the 7th day, he rested, which means that our lives began in a posture of rest, in Sabbath delight. And I think that one of the keys to creativity is reclaiming that place of rest that maybe many of us have lost. One thing that I've started doing is, as part of that, is a digital detox. And I've only done it a couple of times, but like I just decided, hey, you know what? Sunday, I'm not looking at Instagram. I'm not doing any of this stuff. I'm going to put the phone away, and I'm going to be present. I'm going to be present to this in-the-moment analog life. And it actually had such an impact on me that my kids commented on it. And they were like, wow, this is amazing. Would you keep doing that? Because being present is part of restfulness, and being present is part of living a creative life. Okay, the next one, I'm going to move a little quickly here. The next one is delight. Cultivating delight. I asked my wife to do this the other day, and I'm going to hold her accountable. I like this. I get to hold her accountable on something. I asked her, I said, I want you to write down 10 things that you delight in. They can be small things. It could be having a cup of coffee and reading a magazine. It could be, walking around, taking a walk. What are the things that bring delight to you? Do you leave space in your life for delight? Because often when we allow ourselves to engage that's when curiosity starts awakening. That's when we feel arrestedness. That's when thankfulness comes up in our heart. You see what happens here? All these things start firing together. But what do you delight in? The Lord talks to us so much throughout the scriptures about delight yourself in the Lord and about delight. And, Brandon and I, we were talking recently too about how so many of the feasts, so many of the things that God commanded in the Old Covenant, they were feasts. They involved eating. They involved taste and see that the Lord is good. It involved delight. It involved abundance. It involved enjoyment. What do you delight in? And have you lost a sense of delight? Okay, one more. Actually, two more here, but one more. The next one is simply reflection or remembrance. Whenever David got in a situation where his enemies wanted to kill him, he was on the run, which is kind of often in his life. You find these moments where he would stop and he would say, I will remember the acts of God. I will remember the great things that he's done in my life. And I don't know about you, but I have a gift of forgetfulness. How do we forget? But we all do. That's why he said, write it down and put it on your forehead. Right, you did part the Red Sea. That's right. I remember now. I remember now. That's right. You did feed us with manna. Like bread just showed up on the bush. I just went and picked my breakfast. That's right. You were raised from the dead. That's right. Oh, I got it. I got it. Oh, you did lead me through all of that difficulty. We made it through it. Remembrance is a key to creativity because once we begin to reconnect with what God has done in our lives in the past, we remember who He is in the present, and then we posture ourselves to prepare for what He wants to be in the future. There's something about remembrance that ties the threads together that we can so easily forget. That's why I keep a journal. And I've had this practice in my life. I've done this for well over a decade now, that every January I take the first 3 weeks of the year. It's a horrible time. And I don't have coffee or wine or meat or fun or anything. But I journal and I leave space in my life and I get rid of all the attachments, the things that I cling to. I let go of attachments and I cling to Him. And what I do is I take my journal from the previous year as my guide to this year. And I remember what happened throughout this year. What were my prayers last January? What was I going through at this point? And what it does is it ties my life together, and it shows me where I've grown. It shows me where I'm still doing the same stupid things, where I need help, and where miracles took place that I forgot about. That's why it's like, write it down. There's something about the journaling process, writing, keeping in touch with our lives that really can unlock creativity for us. I want to share this story really quickly with you because I think it'll encourage you. And this kind of goes into the reflection time as well as the delight. But Sarah and I just moved about 3 months ago into a new house. Super excited. We lived in our previous house for 16 years, and we were just really thrilled to finally move into a new house. But there was one thing I was sad about moving from this place to the new into the new, and it was because at the top of our road where we used to live, this beautiful hawk used to come and just sit on the telephone wire at the top of our neighborhood. And he was there every day. I developed a friendship with this hawk. We'd talk, and every day I would go out and I would look for the hawk. And if I didn't see him, I just kind of felt like something was off. Where's the hawk? And, oh, there he is. And it became such a familiar part of our lives that my son Brighton named the hawk Malachi. And he's like, oh, there's Malachi. I was like, why is he Malachi? I don't know. He's just Malachi. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. There's probably some deep prof on that, but I don't know. So Malachi the hawk, I was really sad that when we moved to our new house that he wasn't going to be there. But we moved into the new house, and the first day, it was the first time that I sat down at my writing desk, and I had windows in front of me looking out into our backyard. I sat down, I said a prayer, and I started to write. And I looked out the window, and right in front of the window, this hawk flew right past my window. And then he went and sat on the fence at the back of our yard. I've got a picture of it. I took a picture of this. And he stayed there the whole time that I was sitting there writing. And there have been 3 or 4 other times now that I've been there writing, and the hawk shows up. So for me, it was God winking at me and saying, I got you. And I like to think that it's Malachi. He followed us, But that's a simple moment of finding wonder in the midst of the mundane. It's a simple moment of curiosity awakened. It's a simple moment of God seeing something that I delighted in and responding to that. He's that good. He loves what we delight in. Is that music telling me that I'm going long? Okay. No, you're great. I love it. Yeah, you're good. I was like, I'm either about to get the cane or heaven is coming down. I'm not sure which one it is. Please keep playing. Yeah. But I was like, one or the other. This is either really good or really bad, but I need to talk fast. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, what are the hawks in your life? Look for those moments because he'll meet you there. And then the last one that I want to share is friendship. Friendship. And yes, community, but sometimes we can still get lost in community. And I love community. I'm grateful for community. I'm grateful for this community. But sometimes we can get lost in community and be just as isolated in the midst of a group of people. But yet there's something about friendship that refines us, that does sharpen us. You know, it was such a gift last night. I told Sarah this morning, you know, I just got to go and sit with several of my friends here, close friends here, and say, hey, let's talk about the evening. You know, what was your experience there? What did you think? What about what I brought? Did I miss the mark? Did I hit it on the head? What was your experience? You know, and just hearing the feedback and traveling with friends and to be able to look a friend in the eye and say, hey, look, don't hide. I know the devastation of isolation in my own life. And I am committed to not letting that happen to my friends. Isolation is a killer. If I were to write another 5 creativity killers, isolation would be the first one that I put on there. And that might be post-COVID thinking, but we really see that isolation, there's a difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude is a fertile ground that fills us up and nourishes our spirit so that when we go back to the community, we have something to give. But isolation is a pulling away from the community, and it's a self-protection. I get this is another one of my delights. I get this email every Sunday called The Marginalien. And the lady that writes it, her name is Mary Popova, and she's just a brilliant writer. I love her stuff. I look forward to it. It's the only email I like. And this morning, her topic was from the writer Henry Miller on friendship and the relationship between creativity and community. That was her topic this morning, and I was like, this is amazing. I want to read what she said to you, and I'll close with this part here, but she said, the sunshine of life springs from twin suns. We may call them love and art. We may call them connection and creativity. Both can take many forms. Both, if they are worth their salt and we ours, ask us to show up as our whole selves. Love and art, community and connection, ask us to show up as our whole selves. I've done a study on the word integrity, and I found that at the core of the word integrity, it means integrate. It means integral. It means all the parts of who we are coming together and having space. And sometimes I know that if you're anything like me, we have a lot of contradictory parts to ourselves that sometimes it's hard to reconcile who we are. We don't know ourselves. We need the Lord, and we need the friendships. We need those covenanted friendships to help us on the journey of becoming our whole selves. But she said, it is often in the cradle of friendship that our creative energies are strengthened and renewed. Through its tendrils, we find community, a place where our own creative work is reflected and refracted through that of others to cast a shimmering radiance of mutual magnification that borders on magic. That made me want to have some friends, right? Last paragraph, she said, the vital relationship between creativity and connection has been tensed and twisted in the era of Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where self-marketing so readily masquerades as friendship. And so I just want to invite you to take these 5 things that I just shared and really begin to ask God how you can cultivate those things in your life and how those things can help you develop the creative inheritance that He's put inside of you. Because I say it every week on the podcast, and I mean it. It's not just a tagline or the statement on my hoodie, available in the lobby. Keep creating. The world needs your art. Keep creating. The world needs your heart. Because we live in a culture that is rampant with nihilism, with despair, somewhere between narcissism and self-hatred. And for those of us that are followers of Jesus, we are called to be countercultural architects of hope. And I think that that's why the world needs our art. The world needs the art that comes from the place of contemplation. The world needs art that comes from abiding in the place of presence and then offering something that the world has not tasted. So this week, see how you can practice gratitude in your life. Lift up the little of nothing that you have and give thanks for it. Go be curious this week. Get some rest. Delight and feed your spirit. Reflect on the things that you've done and that God's done through you. And then really bless the sacrament of your friendships. And I just want to say, loneliness is an epidemic in our culture. And so I just pray and I just ask, if you're lonely or if you're in a place where you need friends, Lord, I pray that you give friendship, healthy, life-giving friendships that call us to be the people you imagined us to be. And help us to be the friends to eradicate the loneliness that our culture feels right now through creative ways of doing friendship. So that's what I got today. Thank you guys again so much for having us.